Welcome back to another episode of the Israel Connection. Ever since October 7th, Israel is at war. Things are unclear, very vague, and it is become increasingly more and more difficult to cover everything that's happening, but we're still going to do our best to provide that with this episode. Here we go.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome to another Israel Connection. It is February 12th, 140 something days for the war. I'm happy to see you all, and we opened this morning with very, very good news regarding two hostages that were rescued by the IDF soldiers, something that we haven't heard of since the beginning of the war, the first days that we've heard about the IDF soldier that was rescued by IDF forces. There's not a lot of information shared so far about the operation, about how they were rescued. I've read somewhere that they were rescued from like a second floor of a building, and then they were laid down by a rope on the side of the building, something that sounds out of Mission Impossible movies. I can definitely say I saw this, like the initial headline that came out last night at around 10:30 p.m. I was thrilled to hear about that. I was writing to everybody I know, like, finally good news. I think it's been such a long time since we heard good news coming from the war, both from the Israeli or the Palestinian side. It was the first time that I was able to like take a deep breath and like enjoy something that was fun and just focus on being happy about it. This headline was followed by another not as happy headline about two more soldiers that died in the battles in the south of the strip that night, not related to different incidents, to different occasions, but still something that we need to acknowledge, and it couldn't be more symbolic. Even if two hostages are released, it comes with a price, and we all know that. And this debate regarding what is the proper price, it started to align with the political camps in Israel, right? So for the extreme right wing, it's continued the warfare at all costs, even at the cost of hostages, because Hamas must be beaten. And from the left side, a deal to release of the hostages at all costs. And obviously, there's a huge spectrum in between of opinions and ideas regarding to what actually is going to happen, and also what's the right thing to do. This is an impossible choice to make by everybody. Targeting the two goals of this operation to begin with, which is to diminish Hamas's abilities in Gaza and to return all the hostages. Now, we've all known that at some point those two goals are going to start and not align with each other very well. When we're going to start seeing a diplomatic pressure, when there's going to be negotiation for like a certain deal. And it puts more and more pressures on everybody who's involved, whether it's the family of the hostages that are becoming more and more political because they're now part of a political side, or the government that chooses to take the other side. And look, I'm doing this program from home today, and Rotem was considering whether or not to join live or through Zoom. So, as I was starting to say, it's become more and more clear that it's going to be very, very hard to achieve those two goals, both to diminish Hamas and Hamas's presence from the Gaza Strip and safely return of the hostages, even though a military action like yesterday that led to the release of two hostages that were rescued by the IDF is a huge deal. We don't know if it's something that can be possible for all of the hostages. Which raises the question that we've continued to be asking for a long time, and we're going to continue to ask. What's the next step? What's the solution? What's the end goal? What's going to be? And we recently were in a Zoom with Yaron Dekel, who is a brilliant journalist in Israel, and recently became part of the Jewish Agency and was able to share with us some of the personal information that he gets as a previous journalist regarding um, the different pressures that are applied from within and outside of the government for decision making. And he stated that in the upcoming 2 weeks or so, we're going to see something changes, which I think is an interesting approach. He unpacked it that way. He was saying, when you look at the coalition, at the government that we have, which is a very, very right-wing government, a very supportive of the diminish Hamas at all costs perspective, at least the right-wing side of the extreme right-wing side of the government. Their approach is all or nothing for this, saying if we do not diminish Hamas, there's no reason to continue this coalition. That's the approach. That's the approach of Ben-Gvir. That's the approach of Smotrich, and they're a big part of the coalition. They are 1/4 of the coalition in size. If they break apart from the coalition, then the government no longer has a majority, meaning it can no longer pass meaningful resolution at the Knesset, and it exponentially decreases its power and its ability and like free range of motion. It is, because when it no longer will have the majority of the Knesset, it could no longer pass budgets, it could no longer pass calls for ceasefire or for war, which is our extreme measures that also has implication over every, every aspect of life, whether it's economical, cultural, all of that. And right now there's a huge economical toll because of the war. Reservists that are still in reserve, compensation that the country is enforced to provide for reserves that have been in the military for that time, businesses that were closed because of all of the happening, both because their operators are in reserves or they're closed because they're in an area that is dangerous. All of this together puts the pressure on the coalition, specifically the right-wing side, says we need to continue this as long as we can so we can diminish Hamas. And if that's not happening, then they're going to part from the coalition. Now, from the other side of that scale, the pressure that is international over the government, right? The American pressure, the Saudi pressure, the Qatari pressure, Egyptian pressure, all of them calls for some form of an agreement and release of the hostages in exchange for a certain ceasefire. Now, when we discuss the concept of ceasefire, what do we actually mean? Because humanitarian aid goes into Gaza constantly, every day. Whether they eventually reach these civilians or not, that's up to UNRWA, up to Hamas, which we all know what these organizations are being up to. Recently, UNRWA was exposed to have employees participate within Hamas's actions. And out of the a lot of the countries funding UNRWA for a while has stopped funding them, has froze their fundings in order to further investigate whether or not the employees were participating in it. So we have a lot of international pressure calling for a ceasefire that would actually mean stopping the military, the IDF military's action in Gaza. The ceasefire is supposed to be negotiated with Hamas, so that means an acknowledgement and a responsibility from Hamas to stop firing back at Israel and stopping the attacks, and eventually releasing of the hostages. Now, from an Israeli perspective, a ceasefire would also mean an opportunity for Hamas to rearm some of the areas that were occupied and were already dealt with by the IDF, meaning reestablish some of their key points, strategic points. It could also mean regaining some of the strength they had over the residents of Gaza. Now, there is a big, I don't know how to approach it like from the right angle, but there's a lot of gray area regarding what do Palestinians think of Hamas, specifically in Gaza. It's not like we can just put on a survey, see what happens. Those surveys are going to be biased by the authorities in Gaza, which are Hamas. We know that there are people in Gaza that don't want Hamas there because they claim that they are corrupted, because they claim that they eventually are the cause for the IDF strikes and the killing of Palestinian civilians. But there's also a lot of Palestinians that support Hamas. Hamas has been controlling the Gaza Strip for 20 years. It's been educating people for jihad. We've seen videos, we've seen footages, we've seen evidence of Hamas infiltrating UNRWA's system and advocate for jihad education, to hate Israel, to hate Jews. So it's very, very complicated to try and assume what do Palestinian wants. We definitely know that the Palestinian Authority is losing its legitimacy in the West Bank, and don't no one knows if they could actually regain power if we place them in Gaza. Hamas is losing its legitimacy because Palestinians are losing their lives. But in addition to that, a lot of Palestinians that are not part of Hamas participated in the massacre of October 7th and still to these days support Hamas. So it's a very, very complicated situation, which is if we do remove Hamas, right? If we remove the authority, if we remove the leadership of Hamas from the Gaza Strip, who should take that place? Right? It's a big question. It's a big question. Um, According to Biden's approach to this like overall deal, he wants to get Jordan, Egypt, Qatar, and Saudi Arabia involved to create some form of an international coalition that will eventually establish a more strengthened Palestinian Authority in Gaza. Now, this approach tried to resolve not only the Israeli-Palestinian conflict in Gaza, but also the conflict in the Middle East, gaining what we've tried to do before October 7th, which is this larger agreement with Saudi Arabia. But there's no trust in the Israeli public right now to create some, to give the Palestinian Authority. We've seen what happened in Gaza. We've seen what happened when Hamas rises. We know that there's other factors in this sphere that were not taken into account. Iran, Syria, Russia, Japan, all of the China, sorry, not Japan. All of those countries benefits from destabilizing the area, and Iran has been supporting terrorist syndicates in the past. It's been supporting Hamas still, and benefits from destabilizing the area. So if we do leave the Palestinians with an authority that is Palestinian, there is a huge risk that it will regain some of the support from Iran in the past and just recreate another syndicates of terror. This is a major concern. And because of that, at least there's no plan from Israel, which is supposed to be the one factor that knows best what's good for Israelis, because it's coming from a local perspective. We all wish there was a more clear point or a clear vision regarding what's going to be the solution. But in the meantime, it's very, very complicated, and it's also complicated for establishing coalitions. Now, if you're talking about shared life within Israeli society, there's a lot of examples for that to happen. We've seen a lot of schools, a lot of businesses, a lot of organizations, NGO that promotes shared life, because on October 7th and even beforehand, terrorists do not distinguish between Muslim and Jewish citizens when they commit massacres in Israel. We've seen a lot of Bedouins, a lot of Muslims being killed by Hamas terrorists on October 7th, and that triggered more participation from the Arabic society within Israel for the overall efforts. Now, that doesn't mean that situation is now perfect and everybody loves each other. There's still a lot of issues even within Israeli society, but there's definitely seemed to be more shared projects between the two of them. When you look outside, when you look through to the Palestinian side within the West Bank or in Gaza, you can definitely see some residents in Gaza happy to see IDF soldiers, and there's some who are not. Within the West Bank, it's hard to tell what is happening right now because there hasn't been elections for the Palestinian Authority in years. And that's because the Palestinian Authority knows that it no longer has legitimacy. And if elections will be held, there is a risk that Hamas is going to take over the West Bank as well. So it's very, very hard to say whether or not coalitions, local coalitions, are going to be the solution. Eventually, at some point in the future, we will have to talk to each other, but there's no trust right now, at least from the Israeli side, that the other side is not going to try and kill them. And from the Palestinian side as well, they have no trust in the leadership, whether it's Hamas or authorities. So there's no one figure to talk to. There's no one organization that can take responsibility for the Palestinians and says, I'm willing to do X, Y, or Z for this partnership to go. So it's very, very difficult. That's the best that I know. And I've been talking for almost 50 minutes straight now. So I'm going to stop talking and please share what you think on any reaction comments you have. Please do. Phyllis, I see that your mic is open. Are you trying to speak?
Shouldn't be.
Sorry?
Shouldn't be.
Oh, go ahead, Mike.
Okay, the first question, simple question. Are we, next Monday is a holiday. Are we going to be meeting next Monday or, you know,
Check.
oh, okay, now the next question, I know we talked about maybe a couple weeks ago, amongst the Israeli the citizens in Israel, is there enough vocal opposition to what the Israeli government is doing? And is that about to show? Has it shown up yet?
Repeat the question is, what do you mean the government's doing?
Amongst the Israeli citizens, amongst the Israeli citizens, citizens of Israel who live in Israel, has any opposition? Is there more opposition now to what Israel is doing amongst the Israeli citizens in Israel?
When you refer to what Israel is doing, what do you mean?
Well, the thing is that historically, a lot of times when wars start, usually the citizens of that country will rally to support that country's leadership. If it drags on, the longer it drags on, will a lot of Israelis say this is enough of either we're gone too far or we're not solving the problem.
Mm-hmm.
What's the take amongst people who live in Israel?
So you're right. From historic perspective, usually when wars are engaged, after some time, the population start to question the goals of the war, the goals of what's happening, and the price that the country is paying. Historically, you're right. Usually, it's about that time. The starting point for Israel for this war is different. Israel was attacked and had to defend itself. The moment Israel stopped attacking Hamas, Hamas will just continue to murder us. It's done so on October 7th, and it's going to continue to do so until all Israelis are dead. That's the Israeli perspective regarding this war. And this is how they view it. Now, Israelis support the IDF because the IDF is a very is an organization that is very belong to the people. It's how it's viewed because we all serve in the military. We all have our mandatory service, and we all do reserves. A lot of us do reserves, meaning the people that are in the IDF are your friends, your family, your neighbors. It's people you know. And in that, people trust. That trust was broken on October 7th when the IDF wasn't able to respond within the first 24/7, and we've seen the horrors of that. But ever since, the IDF has been trying to regain the trust through transparency, through taking responsibility, and through actions to regain the trust of Israelis. That's the IDF. Now, the IDF is definitely controlled by the government, but it is operating freely within the borders that the government established for it, if that's a proper way to frame it. And Israelis do not support the government. A lot of Israelis right now are very, very upset with the government, not because of the way the IDF operates, but because of the statements that the political side of the government is making, because of the different way they try to resolve right now the crisis and the way it existed, whether it's the humanitarian crisis within Israel, all of the people that were dislocated and are dislocated. They are refugees within the borders of Israel. There's hundreds of thousands of them that are not able to restore their homes because their homes are still at risk. Whether it's the south or the north, people are not allowed to return to their homes because of Hamas, because of Hezbollah, because of all of these terror organizations that are threatening their lives. There's a lot of criticism regarding the way these government's officials are managing the diplomatic affairs, whether it's Netanyahu and the American relationship that we keep seeing headlines regarding a rising tension between the two of them, in personal work and also in work about this joint effort. And there's a lot of criticism regarding self-modeling, regarding the exemplary that they're putting out about how to behave as leaders. That's a distinction that I would do regarding what does the opposition stands for right now. The people support the IDF. They support no ceasefire because we understand that the ceasefire meaning strengthening Hamas, and it's going to continue what it did before. Hamas doesn't change its goals, and it's not going to change them until they're done. What they do believe is that there's definitely a lot of distrust with the current leadership and with the current officers. Now, if you look closely at the formation of the coalition and the way it operates, right now we have the war cabinet, which consists of the prime minister, the minister of security, and two members of the opposition party, Gantz and forgetting the name, and another member of his party. Both of them were chief of the military in the past, and both of them, Eisenkot. Thank you very much. Gantz and Eisenkot. Both of them operate as a moderating piece to the war cabinet. Even though they were not part of the coalition, they are not part of the government, they still chose to be within the war cabinet to still participate in the decision-making and act as a moderating factor. And a lot of the public in Israel, according to recent surveys, wants them to continue to stay there. Whether this government continues or not, they believe that they perform an important role as opposition members within the war cabinet, and they being the responsible part, even though they take a lot of fire back at them from the decisions that are being made, they still believe to hold responsible and to be transparent as possible and try to regain the trust regarding the war cabinet. So if you look at the political figure, there's a lot of opposition regarding the way they behave. But when you look at the structure, the Israeli government, the Israeli cabinet, and the IDF, there's still trust within the people regarding to the action that it's making and that it operates for the greater good, whether it's Palestinian or Israeli. Diminishing Hamas will benefit all sides. That's definitely the Israeli perspective regarding the operation and regarding whether or not there's opposition. Now, there's definitely more opposition regarding the statements of the political figures saying continue the warfare at all costs, even if you don't return the hostages. There's a lot of opposition regarding that perspective, saying we need to return the hostages at all costs. And that's where you could all see, from one hand, families of the hostages, the organization, keep protesting on a constant basis. There's a new square in Israel that's called the Square of the Hostages, Kikar HaChatufim, where they keep bringing up the idea and the public attention to the subject constantly. That's the pressure that is ongoing. Now, that doesn't, I don't know if that answered your question properly or not, but this is how you view coalition opposition and support of organization versus support of political figures.
Okay, it does, but it does, but hopefully, it's a long and it's very complex. There's always a saying, I'll get off in a sec. There's two sides of the story, but this side, in this situation, there's probably several sides of a story instead of two sides.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, thanks for your analysis, and I'll get off.
Okay. Hope I answer your question. Now, are there any more questions regarding recent headlines that you would like us to discuss, or something in particular, or recent news in Israel? All right. Well, feel free to open your mic at any point. The other subject that I wanted to talk about a little bit today, and I wanted to hear your perspective as well, is a new approach coming from the Jewish Agency. Now, the Jewish Agency is the organization that sent me as a Shaliach here. It is the international organization for the Jewish people, meaning its main goal is to keep us together. And they've recently, as a response to everything that's happening, started a partnership with ADL, the Anti-Defamation League, thinking that Shlichim could also serve a role in combating anti-Semitism. Now, this is an interesting, it's a new change within how we view the Shlichut. The Shlichut goal is to connect to Israel. My goal, my role as a Shaliach is to connect to Israel by all means, however possible, mainly through relationships. I know all of you, same as I believe, that with relationship, we can construct a new approach to everything. When you know someone, your perspective changes completely over a certain subject. It's both right about Israel, about the Palestinian conflict, about everything. And goes to about from the Jewish Agency perspective. And now combating anti-Semitism as part of Shlichut's role is a new approach, because until now, and it's my perspective, anti-Zionism is definitely a form of anti-Semitism. I know that there was a recent motion in the Congress that was passed to equalize anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism, and although they are different categories, they do draw from the same source, which is treating Jews unfairly or unequally. But it's going to be a very, very interesting seeing how this is going to develop, since Shlichim do a lot of Israel advocacy work, a lot of connecting to Israel, but combating anti-Semitism is something that us Israeli don't know a lot about, since we don't experience anti-Semitism in Israel. We experience terror, we experience warfare, we experience hardships of, protecting your country, but we don't know what it's like living as a minority in another country. And I don't know what to think about this. I'm still like working through what is the sides, and I would very much appreciate your responses as well. What do you think about this? And if you were a Jewish Agency Shaliach that is now needs to also start combating anti-Semitism, what would you do? Because it's a big thing. So please, I would love to hear your perspective. I know it's a big question. Take your time to to think about it.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, this is still, I'm actually in the, um, um, my feeling is just right off the bat, just hearing about it is, that's always, that's gonna make your job much more difficult. I mean, you're doing full-time now with what you're doing with establishing relationships, and then to spread out more to, for the anti-Semitism, that seems a little bit, um, wrong-sided. Let me put it that way. I think it's going to dilute what you can do, with what you're doing now. It's going to spread itself too thin.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Um, Go ahead, Judith.
I think that I don't anticipate that you would be taking on the broadest scope of anti-Semitism, with white supremacy and other ways that it's been manifested in this country. But I think where it makes a lot of sense and where you can have a very important role is the connection between the rise in anti-Semitism now, at least the rise in the outward expression of anti-Semitism that's been under the surface before, connecting that with what's going on in the Middle East and how the world is reacting to that, and the very basic question of Israel's right to exist. Because Hamas, if you just come down to the basic purpose, Hamas's purpose is to eliminate Israel and to say Israel has no right to exist. And that's a manifestation of anti-Semitism when the people here in this country are coming out in support of Hamas. And I deliberately separate that from their support and concern for the number of people in Gaza that are being killed. It's important for people to understand that that Hamas's strength and continued presence and control in Gaza is directly connected with eliminating the Jewish people. So I believe those two goals need to go together, and the message can be that much stronger.
Thank you. I appreciate your feedback very much. Natan Sharansky, who was the chairperson of the Jewish Agency, published his thesis for comparing the two of them, saying there is the 3D theory in which legitimate criticism becomes anti-Semitism for Israel. The 3D stands for demonization, dehumanization, and double standard, saying if a certain criticism regarding Israel dehumanize Israelis as evil as, as the way they're portrayed right now by most of mainstream media, delegitimize Israel as a country because of an action that the government does, or treated Israel in double standard, it is in fact not a legitimate criticism, it is anti-Semitism. That's his approach, which I find very easy to then look through reality and identify those things. Now, there is a certain aspect of civil advocacy in Israel that I think can translate very well to become like combating anti-Semitism in practicality, that we just need to change like the content that is pouring to them, that I think could be very, very interesting. I have a lot of experience in working with education for advocacy, education for activism. And that could be, I don't know. It's definitely going to be interesting how this is going to be approached. This is going to change the work of the shlichim, maybe specify in certain aspects. But who knows where this is gonna lead? But I feel like it's an important partnership between the Jewish Agency and ADL. I definitely feel like it's gonna benefit a lot for the Jewish world, Jewish organizations working together, just in general. of any practicality. And we'll see what that's gonna develop. But I definitely think we should continue this conversation of trying to identify what's the difference and similarities between anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism. Definitely think we're in a stage where we rebranding Zionism as well. I think that this could be one of the products. I definitely feel like we've taken a step too far from identifying what Zionism is here in the US, and that what people feels like anti-Zionism doesn't necessarily what they think Zionism is. And maybe that will change, hopefully. David, I want to address your question. Do you want to explain what you meant? I think your mic isn't working properly. We cannot hear you. We can hear like, oh, okay. So that's why you wrote in the chat. Fair enough. So if you don't mind asking just explaining the questions you were saying. All right. Yeah, we cannot hear you very well. Your mic, I think, is not working.
Why don't you type it in the chat?
Thank you, Herschel. All right. So while David reframes his questions, any more topics you would like to discuss in today's session?
I guess I could ask what this additional role, I mean, do you have any conception as to what they expect you to do? Do you
No
go
idea.
to college campuses? I don't know. What is it that you would be doing? Or telling people about the history of anti-Semitism? I don't know.
Yeah, no idea. We'll have to see what they come up with. It's a good question. Honestly, I don't know. Learning more about anti-Semitism would definitely be a valuable key point for Shlichim just in general. Whether or not that will require an additional role to their work as Shlichim or not, that's a different question. I definitely feel like learning about anti-Semitism stage one, like from the beginning, what is the historical context for anti-Semitism and how does it look like in other countries, definitely is a starting point to identify what could be, means to approach that, to solve that. It's we'll see. I have no idea what's the expectations yet. Yes. There is a pronounced silence from world Jewry. Okay. I'm sensing what you're trying to see is that you don't see enough echoing in the Jewish world regarding the Israeli efforts. Okay. So I don't know how to answer this question properly because some Jewish organizations do respond to it, some don't. Rita, you're in if you wanna mute your mic or yeah, really. So didn't quite understand your question all the way through, David. I will say that we definitely see a lot of recognition from a lot of Jewish organizations regarding support of Israel. Now, in a month and a half ago, we've seen that a lot of Jews do support the Stand for Israel approach to support the combating anti-Semitism, and we've seen the largest rally of United States Jewry ever in DC, right? That was the march for support of Israel. That's definitely something to be noted. I believe that the majority of Jewry, at least here in the United States, understand the what's at stake and understand that combating anti-Semitism and supporting for Israel goes hand in hand, and that they understand that I don't know if like Israel is doing whatever it can to win this war with the minimum losses possible, or that they don't necessarily agree with the government. There's a lot of diversity within the Jewish world. Now, Bibi agrees with our Marine approach, fight to the death. I have a problem with that statement, because if that statement means destroy Hamas even if all the hostages dies, then I disagree strongly. And there's definitely room for nuanced conversation, both in the government and here in the United States, about all the space in between, right? Whether or not we will be able to destroy Hamas completely, that's a good question. Most experts are now saying it's not possible, because you can always diminish the means. You can always destroy every piece of ammunition that exists within Gaza. But if people still believes in the idea of Hamas, still believes in terror, then your only way through is also eliminating a lot of civilians, something that the world denounces right now. And whether or not Israel needs the support of the world, yes, right now it definitely seems like Israel is operating without the support. But Israel still needs the support of the US heavily, whether it's politically or militarily. The IDF needs the American support for ammunition, for economical value, and for advancing technologies. It uses those still. Finding an agreement within the US government is right now a challenge for the Israeli government. So I don't know what's going to be the right approach. Again, people are trying to now ask the questions: are you willing to give give everything just for the return of the hostages, or are you willing to destroy Hamas at all costs? Neither of those are going to happen. Neither of those two extreme options are going to happen. Because we're not dealing with extreme measures, we're dealing with reality. And with reality, there's a lot of nuanced answers between like those two boundaries, and we need to understand that. We're not going to destroy Hamas entirely, and we need to do everything we can to return of the hostages, but Hamas is not going to let all the hostages go at once, because they benefit from that. We need to figure out what we can do in the meantime. Now, I do want to end on a happier note, because that's what I try to do. And even though it's harder and harder every week to find positive stuff to talk about, and finish on a happier note, first, I want to re-acknowledge the fact that 2 hostages was released by IDF troops this morning, which is a huge breath of air for all of us to just gasp on and finally see some good news. I do think it's something that we should rely on, something that we should hope to see more. And I'm really, really happy about those news. The other one is that our new program, the Shabbat Connections that we've started, where we provide resources for individuals to facilitate difficult conversations, was a success. We have more than 10 families hosting Shabbat Connections, and the topics are not easy. One of them is like diversity in Israeli society, context for the conflict, identifying misinformation, history of anti-Semitism, right? Like navigating a conversation with kids. All of those topics are extremely challenging, and everybody who's participated that sent us a feedback back says it was incredible. Some of them hosted Muslim couples, some of them hosted families, some of them hosted friends. All of them hosted people that they don't normally engage with a difficult conversation during a Shabbat dinner, did, and felt amazing afterwards. And when our media world and our social media world are polarizing and are infested with misinformation, personal relationship and hiding spaces for conversation, for nuanced conversations, create the personal connection we need. And we find solutions, we find acceptance, we find support with people that we don't normally agree with when we try and engage with difficult topics. So we are going to continue the Shabbat connections. We are going to continue to offer the resources for everybody who wants to engage in such a topic, to just host people over, have a nice meal, and talk about stuff that we should be talking about ages ago. And all of you are welcome to participate and engage. We've offered $100 grant as well, like a gift card to reimburse some of the expenses for hosting such a dinner. And we're receiving nothing but good feedback from people saying they want more. So the more people engaged with Shabbat Connections, the more we get more feedback, the more we create more content and more topics to discuss. We curate articles, programs, websites, everything that can help, even suggested questions, everything that can help you facilitate a conversation for you to just use. So if any of you are interested in engaging with Shabbat Connections, please do. I'm very, very thrilled about this program. I definitely feel like it's making a change. Oh, and one more thing. We have told the Jewish Agency that we're staying for the 3rd year here for the Shlichut. So I'm gonna stick around in this community too for 1 more year. And that's all I got. So have a wonderful week, a better week than the one before. I'll see you all. I know Mike says about next week, whether or not there's going to be. It is President's Day. I will get back to you whether or not there's an Israel connection next week or not. But in the meantime, all have a wonderful week. I'm going to share the links and everything that we've discussed this conversation to your email, just like last time. And I'll also give you a notice regarding next week if there's a session or not. Take care. Have a wonderful week. And see you soon.